Hey guys, wanted to touch base with you about unemployment. There's basically going to be a few topics that we need to learn about when it comes to unemployment. The first is how we categorize and measure unemployment. The second is the various think of it as buckets maybe of reasons why people become unemployed. And now you might think, did I do a bad job at work? I could lose my job. And that's not what I'm talking about. We're speaking very broadly here across the country. Some of the main types, we think of them as types of unemployment. And I'll go over what those are here in just a few minutes. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we measure unemployment. I'm sure you've heard in the news that the unemployment rate has gone way up in the past couple of weeks. And so this headline that you're looking at right here says 14.7% unemployment is tragic, and it doesn't even include everyone who's out of work. Millions of laid off Americans didn't actively search for new jobs in April, so they weren't included in the official unemployment statistics. And I wanted to make sure that we understood what that meant exactly. So 14.7% unemployment. That is our current unemployment rate in the country. And just to give you a sense of where that is historically, here is a graph that shows the last 70 years of unemployment rates in the United States. And you can see it looks maybe something like a heart rate monitor, up and down, like a heartbeat. And here is the 14.7% that we are experiencing right now. And that is a huge increase from where we were just 2 months ago when we were really at almost an all-time low. And now we're at an all-time high. So, I mean, just a complete and utter shocker. Nobody would have predicted back in the month of February that this is what we'd be looking at in the month of May. Technically, this is the month of April's unemployment rate. We don't know what the unemployment rate is right this moment. We're always about a month or so behind on getting that data. So that's the month of April. But it's obviously a very high rate. So let's talk for a moment about where those numbers come from. So you learned this in a video that you watched earlier this week, and I wanted to make sure that we really understood this. When we are thinking about unemployment, there's a very specific definition of what it takes to be unemployed, right? Some of you may not have a job, and you also may not be unemployed. So we can kind of put people into one of three categories. Okay. So we have the first category we can call employed. And that's a pretty simple category. You have a job, right? You have a job. So I am currently employed, right? I'm employed as a teacher. Then next we have the unemployed. Now, it's not as simple as these people don't have a job. That is one of the criteria. So don't have a job. But there's one other thing that's really important. They have to be looking for work. They are actively seeking work. So that means they have to be applying for work, interviewing for jobs, inquiring about whether there are jobs available. So they have to be making an active effort to look for work. And that's why this article over here said millions of Americans didn't actively search for new jobs in April, so they weren't included in the official unemployment statistics. Well, we can kind of dig into that a little bit because I can think of some people that didn't actively seek jobs last month, and nobody's concerned that they are unemployed or not counted. If you have a little baby brother or sister, someone who's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, my daughter's 9. My daughter doesn't have a job, and she also didn't actively seek work last month. Is she unemployed? Well, not by the official statistics. She's not unemployed. She didn't. She didn't actively seek work. But are we sitting here thinking, well, she doesn't have a job, she ought to be counted? No, nobody would reasonably think that a 9-year-old should be somehow measured as not having a job. It doesn't make any sense. My dad is 83. He doesn't have a job. He also didn't actively seek work last month. He's retired. He has no interest in working at this point and won't again in his life. So many different people don't have jobs, but they aren't actively seeking work. So what do we call these people? So there's a third category of people, and we simply refer to them as not in the labor force. Not in the labor force. My daughter is not in the labor force. My dad is not in the labor force. Who is in the labor force? These people. Anyone who's officially employed or officially unemployed. Remember, that means actively seeking work. They are in the labor force. And that's an important statistic. Okay. So make a note of that. That is critical. And let's go ahead and take a look at the actual data from our country. So I went ahead and pulled, this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, this data right here. I'm going to help you understand what this all means. So this is called the household data. It's a summary of a household survey. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a government agency, they are constantly making phone calls to a sample group of households throughout the country and asking them questions about their unemployment or employment status. Do you have a job? Do you not have a job? Are you looking for work? That's plenty. They have a whole series of questions they run through. And they collect this data. And this column right here is the one that I want to pay attention to, because this is April 2020. It's the most recent data we have. We have the previous month, March, the month before that, February, and then they include April of 2019 so that we can compare this month to a year before. They also include over here changes from a month ago, March, to the most recent month, April, so we can get a glance at how numbers have changed from one month to the next. Then over here, we have a whole bunch of different categories that are worth looking at. And it starts here with what's called the civilian non-institutional population. This is basically the entire population of the United States of America, but we don't include everybody. We don't include people that are under the age of 16. We don't include people who are active duty in the military. We don't include people who are imprisoned. And so that's basically everybody else. And if you think about it, everybody over the age of 16, if you're not in the military and you're not in prison, technically speaking, maybe you could work. Maybe. My dad's 83, he's not going to work, but it cuts out people that we know aren't going to work, right? Most people under 16 aren't going to work. Most people in prison aren't going to work. And you might say, well, what about those active duty military folks? Aren't they already working? They are. Yeah, they're employed. They have a job. But the whole point of this data that we're collecting here is to measure the health of the economy. And nobody thinks that military jobs represents economic activity. You know, during a wartime, for example, lots of people are suddenly employed in the military, but we wouldn't say the economy is booming. We would say there's a war going on. So we don't really want the effect of people in the military to sort of distort our statistics here. Next we have, and I'm going to actually jump down here to this right here, employed. We've talked about what that means. It's the number of people with a job. So in April of 2020, 133,403. Wait a second, 133,000 people at a job? It seems like we would have more than that. Our country's millions, hundreds of millions of people. Oh, that's because these numbers are in thousands. So this is 133,000. So what would that be? That's 133 million. So we can basically add on 3 zeros at the end of all of these numbers. So 133 million people are employed. Down here we have the number of people who are unemployed. 23 million people unemployed, 23 million. Compare that to the month prior, only 7 million. Unemployment 2 months ago was only 5.7 million. And a year ago, it was 5.8 million. So 5.8 million people were unemployed a year ago. Now 23 million people are unemployed. That is the most dramatic increase in unemployment in the history of this country. Then we have the labor force. And remember, we mentioned that a few minutes ago. The labor force, what is it again? Employed and unemployed people. That's the labor force. Let's go see if these numbers add up. The labor force is supposed to be employed and unemployed people. So I've got a calculator here. I don't think you can see it, but I'm going to go ahead and add up the number of people who are employed, 133,403, plus number of unemployed, 23,078. And the number I get is 156,481, and that's right here, 156,481. That's our labor force. It's the sum of employed and unemployed. Okay. The next thing that you need to know is the unemployment rate. So as we saw before, the unemployment rate, according to this article, is 14.7%. So how do we calculate that? So I'm going to jot that down right here. The unemployment rate, and I'm going to abbreviate this with UR, unemployment rate. Now this is a percentage, and the way we calculate it is we take the number of unemployed and we divide it by the labor force. But let's be specific. What's in the labor force? The labor force, again, is everybody who's employed and everybody who's unemployed. So we add those two numbers together. Because if we want it in a percent form, we have to multiply by 100 when we're done, and we'll have the unemployment rate. So let's go ahead and see if we can make this work using the numbers in the table. So we want the number of people who are unemployed. That's 23,078. And we want to divide it by the number of people who are employed. Where do we find that? Employed, 133,403, plus the unemployed again, 23,078. Okay, and we're going to divide that out. So I'll go ahead and grab my calculator again, get ready to do this. The 23,078 divided by 133,403 plus 23,078. And I get 0.147, which times 100 equals 14.7%. So is that number anywhere on here? Look at this, unemployment rate, 14.7%, right? And that's the number that we got. So that's how we go ahead and calculate the unemployment rate. It's an important measure that we keep track of. And now I want to introduce to you a second statistic that I'd like you to be familiar with. And it has to do with more of a longer term trend that we watch in our economy. As I mentioned, my daughter she's not part of the labor force. She's only 9. She's not even counted in the civilian population. But my dad is. My dad's 83, and he is included in our population count. So he's one of these 259 million people that's included up there, as are all of you, and I am in that total as well. I also am in this total of employed people. Some of you might be as well. A few of you might be included in the unemployed category, right? And some of you are in neither of these. You're not in the labor force. What I want to know is what portion, what percentage of American adults, 16 and over, are trying to work, meaning they either have a job, which if you have a job, you're certainly trying to work because you are working, or they don't have a job, but they are looking. So I want to know what portion of all the adults in America are making an effort to work. And now I'm not doing this because I'm trying to make some moral judgment about people's efforts. You could do that, I suppose, with this data. But really what I want to know is, out of all the people that possibly could be working, how many are actually productive? How many are adding to our economic output in this country? And we care about this because some countries, maybe due to their age makeup, maybe they have a very large number of retired people. They have this very large adult population that isn't producing a lot of goods and services, but they're still consuming goods and services. So countries that have, maybe a lot of old people or perhaps a lot of young people in comparison to people in the middle years of their life, maybe have a harder time producing enough to keep everybody at a high standard of living. Anyways, this statistic that I'd like you to know how to calculate is called the labor force participation rate. Participation rate. So labor force participation rate. Sometimes, in fact, frequently, it is abbreviated by the four letters LFPR, labor force participation rate. This is going to tell us what percentage of the adult population is working or attempting to work. And it's a pretty simple statistic to measure. What we want to do is take the labor force, which again, recall, is the number of people who are employed and unemployed. And we want to divide it by the civilian, and I'm not going to write all of that out. It's the civilian non-institutional population. I'm simply going to write in the civilian population. I'm not going to have any test or quiz questions that are going to hold you accountable for recognizing that soldiers are not counted in this or people in prison are not. So we'll just call it the civilian population. I think I spelled civilian wrong. Throw a little A in there. All right. Employed plus unemployed divided by the civilian population. So do we have that data here? Sure we do. Employed 133,403. Got that from right there. Plus unemployed 23,078. And we want to divide it by the big number at the top, 259,896. And this is going to be a percentage as well, so I should have written this in up here, times 100. So this also is going to be times 100. So what is that going to equal? I'll grab my calculator here. Got 133,403 plus 23,078 divided by 259,896 times 100, and I get 60.2%. So about 6 out of 10 adults, 6 out of 10 people over the age of 16 in America are working or attempting to work. And that number is actually present on this chart. It's right here. It's called, here they simply refer to it as the participation rate, 60.2. And how does that compare to the past? Well, a year ago it was at 62.8. So why did it drop? Well, I suspect in the last month, and sure enough, you can see compared to March, 62.7 down to 60.2. It dropped off a little bit, quite a bit actually. It's been going down for a couple months. It went down probably because a lot of people who lost their jobs in March and early April, they're not looking for work anymore. They lost their job and they're not looking for work, right? Because of this safer at home or sheltering. They're not going out looking for a job. They're just staying home. So they're not participating in the labor force, right? And so therefore the participation rate, the percentage of people who are participating, has dropped off. All right, I hope that was helpful. I'm going to come back in a bit, in a day or so, and have one more video for you to watch that I'm going to make, in which I'll go through with you the 3 broad categories of unemployment, or we might say different types of unemployment. Before I leave you, though, I do want to take a moment to kind of look at some of the data down here, which I think is noteworthy. Now that you have a sense of what these percentages mean, let's take a look at this. Unemployment rates by different categories, demographic categories. So this is for 16 years and over. We know 14.7 is the unemployment rate. That's sometimes referred to as the headline rate. It's the one we refer to in the news media. But for men, and this is for 20 years and over, so now we're really getting more into adults, 13% for men, 15.5% for women. For teenagers, 16 to 19 years of age, it's 31.9%. Now, where does that compare? Because we are now in abnormal times. We have to look at these numbers and compare them maybe to a year ago to get a good sense of how things were. Under normal circumstances for teenagers, about 13% are unemployed. Remember, that doesn't mean 13% are not working. That means 13% are not working and looking. They are looking. But now, 32%. A lot of teenagers lost their jobs. And that's probably because of the nature of the work that teenagers typically do. A lot of restaurant workers, and of course, restaurants are closed. Workers who work maybe in hotels, cleaning services, things like that, those are all closed down. If you break it out by racial ethnic groups, white unemployment rose from 4% to 14%. Unemployment among African Americans from 6.7%, well, we go back a year ago, 6.6% to 16.7%. Among Asians, 2.2 to 14.5, and among Hispanic or Latino, 4.2 to 18.9. So if you look at the unemployment rates, interestingly, Asian unemployment the lowest a year ago. And out of these four categories, not the lowest any longer. Now, white unemployment is the lowest out of these four. Black unemployment was the highest a year ago, but now it is Hispanic Latino unemployment. And again, I would just have to speculate that when you look at the patterns of the way people are employed in this country and the types of people that lost their jobs, or I should say the types of jobs that were lost in the last month or two, a lot of jobs in the restaurant and hotel and entertainment industries. And I think Hispanic and Latinos in this country disproportionately work in those industries. So they are feeling the brunt of this economic shutdown. We can also look at unemployment by level of education. For those with less than a high school diploma, so we might refer to these as high school dropouts or non-finishers, it used to be 5.3%, the highest of the four categories. This is high school graduates, but no college. This is people with some college, maybe a 2-year degree. And this is people with a 4-year college degree or more. And predictably, the more education you have, the lower the unemployment rate. That would seem to make sense. And that still holds true today, but take a look at this. The unemployment rate among those with college degrees went from about 2% to about 8%. So it certainly went up. But for those with little education, 5% all the way up to 21%. So fully 1 out of 5 people who did not complete high school have lost their jobs. And even those who completed high school, 3% all the way up to 17%. So some huge drop-offs there. And we can see those change numbers right here from a month earlier. So interesting numbers anyways, tells us a bit more of a story than just simply looking at the 14%.